Welcome to the season finale of the Creating Belonging podcast. Let's make sure I'm looking at the right camera here. Hello, and welcome. I've got a few guests from our past episodes. We've got our LinkedIn Live going, and I'm going to see if I can figure out where to see some Q&A. There we go. I see I've got people chatting. So I'm going to pay attention to the chat over here. And as you've got Q&A, would love to hear any questions that you all have, and we'll answer those, bring those into the conversation. But to get us started, right here next to me, I have the Creating Belonging model. I understand that we may have some people who are new to the work today joining us on this LinkedIn Live. And so I want to give a quick overview of the Creating Belonging model, just so people understand what the heck are we talking about. So a year ago, I published my first book titled Creating Belonging. And it describes how belonging is created at the intersection of authenticity and acceptance. And so we start with a Venn diagram, like all great models, and then we move that out into a quadrant where we have authenticity on the vertical axis and acceptance on the horizontal axis. And that gives us 4 different areas within this Creating Belonging model that we might experience ourselves being in the different communities or workplaces, the different places where we are. And so down in the lower left-hand corner, we've got when we're low on authenticity, when we're low on acceptance, that's what we call that we're in recluse, where we are really not showing up with much of ourselves. And we're really not kind of engaging with the people in that community. Thing about recluse, it's not a bad place to be. It is absolutely okay to be in recluse if we need to be there for safety reasons. However, ideally, we have people moving into belonging. When we're high on authenticity, low on acceptance, it's what we call overbearing, where we aren't really appreciating or respecting others. And it's where I say privilege lives, where we've got some blinders on and our assumptions about what the rest of the world understands. If we go to the opposite end of the spectrum, when we're high on acceptance and low on authenticity, it's what I call minimizing. This is where we are muting aspects of ourselves to make other people comfortable with our presence. But if we've got the right balance of authenticity and acceptance, we get to move into belonging. Also understanding that we navigate around this model on a regular basis every day. And so you're not in one place all the time in the different communities you're in. We move around, but the ideal is that we're moving into a higher place of belonging. So I have with me today a few of our podcast guests to just have a discussion about their experiences on the podcast and bringing some of that into this bigger conversation, and excited to be doing it live. So I'm going to go in order of podcast episode release. And so first, I'm going to introduce Veronica Rivero. Veronica Rivero here in Chicago. And I'm most excited, Veronica, for the restaurant that you're opening because I love queso. Veronica, do you want to just give a 30-second intro?
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm from Lima, born and raised in Lima, Peru. I lived all over the U.S. from New York City to most recently Chicago. And I am part-time tech sales and part-time entrepreneur. I'm opening a Tex-Mex restaurant in the suburbs of Chicago later this fall. So follow us, chicagotexmex.com.
Yes, I'm excited for queso. We don't do queso well in Chicago. So
can't wait for you to try
it. And then up next, we had our 6th episode, which was a 2-parter with Lauren Glazin. And I love the title of this one, titled Blonde Ambition. So, or Blonde Identity, sorry, a play on Blonde Ambition, Blonde Identity. Lauren, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, both of them work, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm Lauren. I am living in New York City, working in learning and development. Used to work with Justin, and originally from the UK, from London, but in America 10 years now. And yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for including me.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And then our most recent guest on the podcast, we actually dropped the second half of her episode this morning at 7 a.m. We have Dr. Britt Andreatta. Britt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Justin, and lovely to connect with everyone who's listening today. I am Britt. I create brain science-based solutions, and I write books on the brain science of success. So I'm a geek. I love to geek out on all that kind of stuff, but I'm also in training and development. So moving some of those best practices into corporations around the world. And I grew up in Colorado and then moved all over the United States. I went to many different high schools and landed and am currently in California.
Awesome. Thank you, Britt. Thank you. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, I have your books behind me next to my book.
Thank you.
So I guess to get us started, I want to dive right in. And I'm just curious, since your episodes have been released, I'm curious kind of what conversations you've had with folks. Veronica, you have the most listeners on your podcast, so I'll bet you had some conversations since it was released. What are some of those things that have come up?
Yes. I think overall something that came up is just bringing your authentic self at work and how that varies on, number one, where you work, who you work with, and if you work for a corporate or nonprofit, and also something about along the lines of redefining professionalism, right? I think that when I graduated college over 15 years ago, my first job, being professional, what does it mean? It's wearing a suit, right? Getting my hair straightened up and, proper makeup and skirt length and all that. And now that has changed a little bit. Now that, the first half of my career was in corporate, second half more like tech or small startups. And that has evolved too. I feel like I'm more comfortable personally, and some of the friends and people that listen to the episode talk to me about, hey, I'm in software sales. I just I've always wanted to dye my hair blue, and I'm going to dye my hair blue, and people don't care in tech because I'm doing fantastic work. Or, I'm going to put my pride flag because this is who I am at my desk and represent myself. Or this just being able to wear what you want, also follow your company's guidelines, at the same time also being able to be your authentic self and help others be more vulnerable and help others do the same, inspire others to bring their authentic selves to work and redefine what being a professional means.
Yeah. The title of Veronica's episode was The Pink Blazer. We talked about wearing the pink blazer at work, which I love. And, that I think authenticity expression, the way that we dress has come up in several conversations when it comes to gender identity. We spoke with Vanessa Sheridan about her journey as a trans individual and kind of how clothing becomes a part of our identity. And we also talked about hair with Kendra, because not everyone has, kind of typical straight hair, right? Some people have different textures of hair, but quote, professional standards aren't always cognizant of that. I'm curious, Lauren or Britt, if you have anything to add into that.
Well, I was going to say, the Crown Act is really important because for so long, people of color have really been ostracized for hair texture and hairstyle. And I can't think of anything more demeaning every day than knowing that how God made you is not acceptable, is not okay. And having to spend a lot of time and energy and money on that and even face criticism and even punishment for not adhering to those standards. So I think everyone needs to be paying attention to the Crown Act and what it does to even the playing field and try to undo some of that discrimination. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we all need to be able to show up as we really are. And, speaking as a white woman, I have so much privilege around that. I don't have to think about that. And yet so many people, it's a daily part of how they have to armor up to go into work and do their jobs.
Yeah. Britt, some listeners might not be familiar with the Crown Act. Do you have like a 30-second synopsis of what that is?
It's legislation. So I don't have all the details on it, but it's basically legislation that that says physical appearance and particularly hair can not be used to discriminate you. So it's really trying to undo the unspoken discrimination, or often very times blatant discrimination that is done around hair texture and hairstyle. I'm wondering, Veronica or Lauren, if you know a little bit more about it. I've been following it enough to know that it's super important, but like I don't know some of the specific details of it, but I know it's been moving through the legislation process.
No, you've been teaching me the last 5 minutes about it, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that either. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's definitely something to pay attention to. Well, speaking of hair, the blonde identity. I'm curious your thoughts on this, on kind of the representation of, appearance.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's something that, again, I used to think about a lot, especially the company that we worked together in, Justin, was much more buttoned up. And then I transitioned to, work in tech companies. And I felt so much more myself, being able to dress more sort of like androgynous or just like however I wanted to show up that day. So it's interesting. And actually, like, there's conversation where I grew up in England, everyone wears a school uniform. It's mandatory. There's no like, it's very like American like TV show for us to be like, oh, like kids are not wearing uniforms. And so everywhere in the UK, I mean, most of Europe, honestly, but I wore same in Peru. Yeah. I wore a school uniform every single day of my life. And now I talk to my wife about it, and we have like discussions about it all the time, about like where will our kids go to school and like things like that. And I'm like adamant, I don't want them to wear school uniforms because I feel like it sucked so much of my personality out of me. But then there's obviously the other side of the coin where, like how do kids dress and is it appropriate and things like that. But I'm a bit of a free spirit. So I like being able to sort of dress and wear my hair like, this is not particularly professional. I was in the office this morning and like, it's all good. So, and to answer your other question, Justin, about like what conversations that we've been having, it's funny. A few of my friends have been listening to the podcast and they're like, whoa, like, I didn't know that. And so I don't know. The conversations that I've been having are more around people that I've like pushed to the podcast and like learning, more about me. And it's interesting to like see what people pick up on and the things that maybe I don't even like bother to share because like I think they're like mundane, but actually people find them interesting. So that's been cool to see how that unfolds.
Yeah. I love the vulnerability that we've been having in the conversations, because I think it's important to have that, ability to share, just all the various aspects of our identity, and even the ones that the people we interact with on a regular basis, things that they may not know. And it makes me think of, I want to share a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at a conference in Raleigh and on creating belonging. And one of the participants who, works in our realm of talent development and, is used to having those conversations around authenticity and being open and being vulnerable. And she said that she had this big aha moment when there was an individual that she was in a classroom with, and he said that he was a younger widow, like early 20s widow. And it made her realize, she thought about that, and she realized that she never talked about the fact that she was a widow because she didn't want to give that kind of, bring up a potentially negative subject for others or make others feel bad. And so she started to think about leaning into that and reclaiming that as an identity, because it still is something that's a part of her. I'm curious if that story sparks anything for anyone.
I mean, for me, yeah. I mean, I think about so many of us have delved into the world of diversity and inclusion training and this idea of the iceberg, right? Like that there's certain parts of our identity that people can see about us. And then there's the parts of our identity that we share. And then there's a whole bunch. Most of our identity is under the waterline, right? All these things that we've lived through, being a child of divorce, what your economic status was, what your native language was. Do you have a mental or physical challenge that you live through or work with? Are you a survivor of something? I mean, there's so many pieces of our identity that we don't share or can't share or are too busy to share, or there's consequences for sharing, right? And I always think about, I remember my own journey around went off to college, totally privileged white kid, and then learned a lot of stuff and had a lot of those blinders taken off. And I know for myself, I remember someone saying, I said, oh, I don't know any gay people in my life. This was before I even identified as bisexual. So I didn't even identify myself as one. But I remember this person saying, no, you do. You actually have a lot of gay people in your life. You just haven't let them know that you're safe to be around yet. They don't know that you're safe to come out to yet. And that really shifted my perspective around, oh, if I'm going to, understand the role that privilege has, it also means that people will not be their authentic selves around me unless I am consistently and persistently giving signs that I have some awareness around this. And it really shifted how I talked about things and how I used my language to create openings for other people to see a little bit more of who I am, and also to create that sense of safety that maybe they could share more with me. And sure enough, once I did that, it was amazing how many people in my life were gay or who had experienced different things, or people of color who, seeing those markers in my language and behavior, felt more comfortable telling me the authentic truth of their lives and their experiences. So I think that this whole journey is our own journey around our own identity, but it's also around seeing how and where we are safe enough to be vulnerable, because it's risky to be vulnerable if there's not some indicator of safety. People have died for not, for sharing who they authentically are. And so I think that level of, we always need to be mindful of, that's the reality. People get hurt, people are killed around some of these topics.
I think it's also important to recognize that being able to not disclose parts of our identity is also privilege, right? Because there are others who have marginalized identities that they can't hide them. If we think about race, disability, right? Like just someone's mere presence says something about them. Veronica, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think actually just to offer a little side of the coin for what Lauren said about the uniforms, I think that for me personally, growing up in a all girls Catholic school, extremely conservative, to your point, Britt, about I didn't know any of my friends, they were gay or not, but I think the uniform, the reason why I liked it was because out of the bat, we were all the same in the way of hey, even if you are richer or poorer or middle class, we all wear the same uniform. We're all come in a way. I would love to see that, when I'm interviewing for jobs or in different ways. It's oh no, the first thing people hear is my accent, or oh, she's not gonna be doing this or that. Instead of having that unconscious bias, in a way, I think that's kind of a first step of we're all starting from an equal playing field, but also in small pockets of groups, being able to create that open environment of belonging, right? And telling some of my friends hey, I'm struggling with these things, or when one of my girlfriends came out and saying that I like girls, and I'm okay, that's great, I'm here for you. That doesn't affect how I feel about you or anything about our friendship. So I'm new to this, because of where we grew up, but educate me, teach me, let's talk about it, and your secret's safe with me until you're ready. So kind of started from that same playing field, but taking it to the next level. And I mean, I do wearing my pink blazer and all that, but in certain situations, I do feel starting from the same playing field just helps with that unconscious bias. And then you got to build those smaller pockets of groups where you can be vulnerable and help others also open up about themselves and the ways they think and how we can help each other.
Yeah, there's an interesting balance there of how do we level the playing field at the same time, how do we lean into our authenticity? And it makes me think of one of the biggest themes that, and I think we've been edging around this a little bit. One of the biggest themes that came out of many of the discussions in the podcast was the concept of representation. Because I think that when the more we have representation of various identities, it does start to, I hate this word, but normalize those identities in a way that starts to level the playing field. And so I want to dive into that topic a little bit. And I'm curious if any of you have an example, and maybe we've already talked about it. So, another example of representation, how representation has helped you lean into your authenticity.
Well, I think I have ways where it's helped and ways where obviously lack of it has, hindered. I think I talk about this a lot, and actually as I work in L&D on the side, I'm also becoming a therapist, a marriage and family therapist. So the work kind of intertwines there, and it's so interesting to see sort of behavioral science in that way, and how systemic, how many family systems work, and then corporate systems work, and all of the things that come with it. But for me, as I've been thinking about this, and I think about me and my wife, and if we start a family and things like that, and what lesbians do I see that have a family, and sort of the life that heteronormative standards shoot to or aim towards. And so what I mean by that is this is a pretty heteronormative world, and I can think of Ellen DeGeneres maybe, or Abby Wambach and Glennon Doyle, but I don't have thousands of examples of people who are doing the thing that we're trying to do, and there's not years of hundreds of years of different people. The world's been around for 10,000 years or something, and we're living in the last 8 years where gay marriage is legal. And so it's a really interesting time for us. It feels whatever, it's been legal, and that fight's over or whatever, but it's literally been 8 years out of thousands of years. And I find representation really important. And actually, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but Justin, you and I had a conversation. I was struggling to come out when you became my boss, and people at work did not know. And we had a conversation, and you looked at me and you were like, honey, I can never go back into the closet. I couldn't pretend, even if my life depended on it. And I was like, I hope someday to get to that point where and I say that I rip off your line, Justin. I take it all the time, because I'm now at that point where I'm I am so gay. I don't even I want to have uncomfortable conversations, bring it on. And I'm not obnoxious about it anymore. I've reined that in a bit, Justin, in the last 4 years, but it's more so just in a helpful way, trying to represent the things that I know about, so other people feel comfort. And that's all we can really do, I think. So that was my soapbox.
I want to add to that. Being in work where I am always creating presentations for other people, I always think a lot about representation in things that we create. So, for example, I'm very intentional every time I give a keynote speech or in my books, is that I am making sure that the photos that I choose are really representative. And I'll actually go back and make sure, do I have people of different ages? Have I really represented different backgrounds and life experiences? And I think it's really important. And I just did a talk for a major global financial company just a couple months ago. And one of the members of the audience looked me up and emailed me and said, "Thank you so much for having a picture of a woman in a headscarf in your deck." She said, "It's the first time I felt myself represented." And she said, "For me, the headscarf is a very important symbol of my identity. I am very proud of it. I know people have judgment around it, but I loved the way that I could see myself in your presentation. And the fact that it moved her to the point where she looked me up and sent me an email afterwards just confirmed that we're all hungering to be seen. And when someone takes the time to make sure that, that there's representation. Now, the other thing that we have to caution against is it can't be fake representation, right? We can't have all these amazing photos on the company website and nobody actually looks like that in the company, right? So it's a commitment to the reality of representing the real diversity of all this beautiful humanity, both in our workers and our customers and our executives. We've got a long way to go in the C-suite to have equal representation. But I think it really matters for all of us. And we also play a role in creating that for other people in whatever ways that we work or live in our neighborhoods.
Absolutely. I think something I like to add to that is that whenever, I've hired people in the past when working for corporate or just even being the only Latina or woman in the group, because in tech, we also don't have many women or Latinas. I like to just start, by pre-phrasing, like, let's, before you look at these resumes, before you get anything or don't understand a name, let's seek to understand, not to judge, or sometimes, I've done this experiment in the past where like, I just take out the names, right, in the resumes and just give them based on their experience. And so that they can add, we all have unconscious biases that we're all working on. So they can just, based on the experience, the different things, commonalities or work, so that have that playing field, kind of like wearing that uniform again, but also go from there and maybe talk to someone that you've never talked to before, or just try to expand your thinking and the way you approach your view of the world and your own job.
Thank you. Thank you. One thing for our live listeners, I am paying attention to chat over here. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in and we'll bring that into the conversation. But I wanted to summarize one thing that I heard, and this came, I think, really from both Lauren and Britt, was the understanding of the impact that you can have on others in representation that may seem inconsequential to you, right? Like, yeah. Lauren, I remember sitting and having that conversation, but I don't remember that quote. And I love that you do. And, for Britt, what seems, while intentional, you had such an impact on someone. And so just, I think, keeping in mind that we all have elements where we can infuse different types of representation into our interactions with people, and keeping that front of mind to help them. I know that, and I do know, Lauren, that back then I was absolutely like, my mission was, I'm out of the closet and I'm never going back in, because as the story that I start a lot of things with, I once had a boss who said, you're too open with your sexuality, when I wasn't actually at all at the time. And so I never want to be in that situation again. And I know that being representation for others will do that. I want to transition a little bit to talk about the relationship then between representation and authenticity. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about kind of the because this is a big theme that's come up, representation and authenticity, I think, create a virtuous cycle. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I absolutely agree. And I'm reminded of Dr. Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and shame and courage. And she talks about vulnerability as our greatest measure of courage, right? Because when we engage in an act of vulnerability, it's a risk. We are opening ourselves up for potential judgment, potential discrimination, potential positive experiences, but we don't necessarily know how it's going to turn out, right? And yet it's such a courageous act. And I think when I think about representation, what I see is a lot of really courageous people who are willing to go first, even though super risky. So I think about the Ellen story. Ellen came out publicly. It did not go well. Like, she lost her job, she lost her following, she received death threats. Like, she is an example of someone who really broke that barrier, and now I think is seen as the hero she always was all along. But at the same time, it was very damaging. So I think a lot of people who saw what happened to her said, I'm going to stay in the closet a little bit longer. That didn't go well. And at the same time, her, along with many other brave souls who were taking the risk to come out, now create an environment where we have a lot more representation in media. I think media plays a significant role. I think TV producers and movie producers have some of the most powerful opportunities to show us reality and then make people more comfortable. I think about now how many men I see kissing in TV shows and movies, and that would have never been seen 10 years ago. And yeah, some people are going to be super uncomfortable with it because it's the first time they've ever seen it. But after you see a few, you're like, oh, okay, a kiss is a kiss, whatever. And we can really desensitize people to some of their judgments or beliefs that they have through representation. So representation is super, super powerful both ways. We also overrepresent African Americans in media as criminals. And so and there's studies on this in terms of like how they represent 90%, I'm making this statistic up, but it's a really high number around African American actors or Black actors, and how they are put in roles that have a criminal nature to them. And then that feeds the stereotype that people perceive when they consume that media. So we have to be super careful with representation because it can be helpful or it can be hurtful.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think it's really hard to be authentic without representing something. Like, I don't even know if it's always like so front of mind for people to be, I'm just talking about like everyday life, right? When I'm standing up there, I'm giving a training to people and I'm saying things, or I'm listening in a certain way or asking certain questions like this, and I'm being authentic, I feel like I'm probably representing different things, or people are using their own perspective to sort of figure out what that means for them, because it's sort of personal, isn't it? Like, if I see you being authentic, Justin, that to me could represent like, well, you're an American and you're being that, but for you think, well, I'm coming across like a man and I'm being, I'm representing like men that they can listen or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's definitely like an introspective understanding. And like, sometimes I think I'm being super authentic and someone's like, what, you were like acting up then? And I'm like, was I? So I don't know. I can get in my own head and go for days on the spiral, but yeah, hopefully I'm making some sense.
Well, I think there's part of it, I go back to, there's a story that I tell about an executive that I worked with that didn't like the idea of authenticity because he would say, well, if someone's an asshole, then that just gives them permission to be authentically an asshole. But I don't think that's what authenticity is. I think that authenticity should be much more intentional. Like, we do just show up, right, as ourselves every day. Some parts good, some parts not so good. But I think for me, the idea of authenticity is really understanding who do we want to show up as in the world and being a little more intentional with that. Because there is, there are probably things that I'm representing on a daily basis intentionally and unintentionally, and some that, I may not want to show up as unintentionally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I want to marry the intentionality into authenticity.
I think it's a balance, which we're all trying to figure out. Like Lauren, you said, sometimes, when I first moved to the US, I was 18 and I was trying to get rid of this accent because I'm such a perfectionist, right? So I'm like, why can't I speak perfect English? And I would meet people in college at Notre Dame, which I was part of the 1%, not 1% rich, 1% Hispanic. And I was, they would be like, oh, I love your accent. And I would be like, oh, I hate it. And, oh, okay. And then I realized so I shift my mindset on that and then made it my mission to help others that are also immigrants or international students to now when I meet someone that has an accent and goes through the same things that I go through, I help them reframe with like, hey, if I meet someone that has an accent, I automatically think that they speak maybe another language, or they're just smart, or they have world experience, right? So I try to help them see it that way, so that they're also proud of where they came from and from their accent. But also sometimes we can overdo it, right? I can go to just like, hey, Latinos, just Latino women, and we all are ha 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 rah rah. But guess what? We're still underrepresented in the C-suite, in tech. Not just Latinos, African Americans, LGBTQ, we're all underrepresented in the C-suite. So we still gotta, hold leadership accountable, find those allies that understand what we're going through, but also want to champion, not just us being surrounded by others that are just like us, right? Like we gotta help each other, elevate each other, and find that balance of being our authentic self, but also help others that are not like us understand why it's important to bring that representation.
Yeah. And Veronica, you make me think of another concept that came up that I want to talk about, because you had mentioned, and I think you talked about this in your original episode too, which was, when you moved to the States, you were really trying to, diminish your accent. And then over time, you kind of grew into your own acceptance and comfort with it, and realizing that, it is a part of you that you don't want to be ashamed of. And so that leads me into thinking about some of the conversations that I've had around society's expectations of us, and how we, try to get ourselves to fit into those expectations. And essentially what we're talking about is minimizing, right? So how are we kind of pulling in our own authenticity to be what other people want, or what we're told other people want? What thoughts do y'all have on that?
I mean, you and I spent a good chunk of our podcast talking about just my journey as being a girl and then a woman, and being socialized really early on that my body would be sexualized, whether I wanted it to be or not. And all the message I received around, needing to dress to attract a man, and at the same time, be careful and, always check the back seat of your car. And it's always this double-edged sword of, the goal is to be sexual and attract someone, but don't do it too much, or else you're going to get a bunch of bad stuff happen to you. And it's very confusing. It's a very confusing journey around that. So I think that, who you're supposed to be to whom and when can sometimes be a moving target, and the very thing that is complimented is turned around and used to attack. And I think that, and I just have that experience around gender. I know that racial identity and sexual orientation and all these other aspects of our identity are even doubly confusing. So I'm struck by, we all grow up being told by people around us how we should be and what the pros and cons are of that. And then we have our lived experiences, and then we've got media. It's very confusing. And it's hard to unlearn that stuff. And I shared with Justin that I find myself thinking in my head things that my mom said to me, that when I hear them in my head, I go, oh my God, because I have a daughter now, and I find myself wanting to pass on those messages. And then I'm like, wait, no, that's not a message I want to pass on. But it's amazing how quickly that voice is in my head. Men won't like that. Don't do that, because men will be threatened by it. And it's just it's scary, the level of brainwashing you have to intentionally be aware of, so that you don't pass it on unconsciously.
You make me think of a TikTok I just saw yesterday that was of this mock thing of like mothers in the 70s having a meeting and talking about what are all the lies they can tell their children to scare them. That very much shaped us as Gen X and millennials. Well, Lauren, I'm going to pick on you because I know I can. When it comes to societal expectations, I know one of the things that we talked about, and it was almost this trite statement that I said, was, how you came to the States to find your freedom. In that, I assume there are some societal expectations that you may have been escaping, or, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, on your societal expectations, and then how that, your identities.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the societal expectations cross borders. So I maybe trying to like escape from it in some ways from England, and being like in like a pretty tight-knit Jewish community where things are expected of you at certain ages, and anything other than that is deemed like not successful pretty much. And still I find myself having these conversations with my parents where, or other parents where they're like, they just like success is like being married to someone of the opposite sex, or maybe of the same sex now, like maybe that's like entered the conversation, like some kids, like a good job, owning a house. I'm just like, I don't know if that's how I define success at this point. And it can be like pretty lonely, is because like when your whole family or like when your whole community thinks that like that's what success is, you can feel like kind of crazy and thinking like, well, maybe I don't want to be in a marriage with just two people, or maybe I don't want to be, maybe I never want to own a house, or maybe, I want to move every 5 years or something. It's like anything outside of like what's deemed societally successful can be pretty isolating. So I wonder how much society pushes us on the journey, on like a lazy river. It just makes us do the things that everyone else does. And yeah, I don't know. I think that like the therapy school and like the L&D stuff, and just having to like face my own demons and battles and coming out and things like that, they make you think like, what do you really want? And I don't know. Does anyone know? Like, I don't know. Like, does anyone have the answers? So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you brought up a good point on, everyone has their own definition of success, right? And I think we all grew up with, for me too, oh, Latina, you're going to be a housewife and get married by 25 and all that. I was like, 25? I don't even know what I want to do with my life at that age. And I was living in New York City at the time. And I think this is why I love big cities too, because they're a little bit more open, not where we all would love them to be, but also I saw people that look like me, that I saw representation in my food, and certain C-level executive and people from all backgrounds. And I learned so much. So I did love that, but also like, hey, I don't want a house. Some people want the white picket fence. Others want the white picket penthouse. Like it's what you want. It's different. And some people want kids, so they don't. I mean, there's always going to be, unfortunately, people that will judge us if we don't fit within their mold. But again, just trying to understand, and maybe just coming up front and saying, hey, this is my definition of success. It might not be yours, but I'm really happy who I am, what I'm doing, and hopefully you can be happy for me and for others that have chosen this path as well.
Thank you. Well, so I'm just looking at the time, and I know that this is eventually going to turn into a podcast that people are going to listen to, and we'll probably just release this whole chunk as one. So I want to start to wrap up the conversation. I don't see any questions coming in the chat online. And so I want to thank everyone for your participation in the Creating Belonging podcast this season. It was very much an experiment in, can I launch a podcast? I did. Today was an experiment in, can I do a LinkedIn Live? The answer is yes. So I want to thank you all, but I want to just see if anyone has any closing thoughts or words they want to share.
No, I'm proud of you. I think this was awesome, and what a great experiment, and it was successful in my eyes. So
thank you, Lauren.
I want to say that I really value the model you created. I think it just there's such a depth and richness there that really allows these conversations to come forward in a non-threatening, exploratory way. And I think everybody can find themselves on the model and also see that they've been in all four quadrants at various times around different parts of their identity. So if folks haven't read the book yet, I encourage you to pick it up. I think it's really great. And I think it's a great way to open up some of these conversations with people at work and in your family, and just start to kind of explore how are each of us on that model, and how do we feel like we are authentic in our lives, and where are we maybe missing some of that. I think that's a great thing for us all to explore.
Yes, thank you, Justin. Thank you, first of all, for creating a safe space for us to be ourselves, to share our stories, but also for creating your model. I think I mentioned to you during my episode that as someone that's a DI keynote speaker and has been through so many trainings and taught trainings and even sold some DI programs as well in tech, I just thought it was great, very simple, but also at the same time, just a great, easy way for anyone to identify their own unconscious bias and go beyond the things that we hear over and over, right? So thank you for creating that, and also for opening up this forum. I think it's great, and hopefully for those out there listening to us, they can identify with our stories or reach out to us, and we can help them come and bring their authentic self, whatever it is, at work, and the nonprofit, being entrepreneurs, or whatever it is, so speak up, like Lauren said, because that's something that I feel like for me, it's not always gone well, but I try to, speak up whenever I can and just lead the way for others out there. So thank you for creating this great space.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you all for your endorsements. I swear that, like, every time I record something, I'm like, I swear this isn't just self-flattery, like, inducing like people to say nice things about me and my work, but I really appreciate it. So thank you all for your participation, and stay tuned. Season 2.
Yeah.
We'll see when it comes out. Thank you all.